everyone, I'm Terralon. Welcome to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. I'm here today with Michelle Payette, a commissioned minister, educator, public speaker, and church partnership manager for the world's largest prison ministry, Prison Fellowship. She's also the founder and executive director of Beacon of Light, an organization that educates and reconciles families of the incarcerated. After spending nearly 2 years behind bars in the New York State prison system, Michelle realized she wanted to make a difference by ensuring parents stay connected with their kids while they serve their prison sentences. Currently, she's devoted to addressing social needs by coming alongside families of the incarcerated and educating community members on how they can do the same. Today, Michelle's going to talk about her challenging journey of being a mother behind bars, plus what led to the start of her life-changing ministry. Hi, Michelle. Welcome.
Hi, how are you, Terralon?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Very good. It's a beautiful day. I'm in New York and we have a lot of snow, but the sun is shining, so it's beautiful.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, I'm in California. It's not so sunny right now, but it's still a beautiful day.
Yeah, we borrowed it for a day.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you so much for being here. You have such an impactful testimony that I want to really talk about, but I do want to start by just getting to know you a little bit. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background and your family upbringing?
Sure. I was born in Chicago. I was the third, I should say I am the third of three daughters. I'll probably get a little heavy on you right from the beginning.
Oh, it's okay. We've heard heavy before, so you just go right into the heaviness.
Yeah, my sisters are 10 and 13 years older than I am, and I was always told that I was the only child that was planned. And in hindsight, I'm like, I look at it and you would think that that would be a real blessing that they wanted me. But I often joke when I'm sharing testimonies with people, depending on the situation, that, you know, I was a failure from conception. At least that's how I pictured myself growing up. And it was because I was planned. I was supposed to save the marriage. I was supposed to be healthy. I was supposed to be a boy. They wanted a boy. And, you know, as a child, your mind, you raise yourself in thinking, when you know what your parents want, that if you're not what your parents want, that you were a failure. That's how I interpreted that growing up. My parents' marriage failed. What I did not know until later in my life was that there were legal issues in my family. And it caused both of my parents to drink. They were both alcoholics. My mom suffered with severe depression, and the alcohol made that worse. My father became angry and abusive. And because my sisters were both older, they moved. They moved and they left and began their own lives. And that was kind of how I was raised until my mom left when I was about 4.5 to 5 years old. She left, she met somebody else, and I was left with my father. My dad abused me both physically and sexually from the time I was 4 to 9. And it really impacted, I now know in hindsight, and I'm very careful when I say this because, as everybody heard in the intro, I served time in New York State prison, and I am responsible for the actions that I made, but I can see in hindsight how I got to where I was. I truly believe no one's born wanting to be a criminal. We all want to be loved and fill that void, but I can see now how my young life and the abuse that I suffered led me to the point that I ended up at in my mid-40s as an adult. So it was crazy, but we were born and raised in Chicago until I was about 5. We moved to Saratoga Springs, New York, and that is where my mom was originally from. My dad was in the Navy, and she moved when she met him, and they got married. And I spent my youth in Saratoga. Eventually, I ended up living with my mom and the man that she married, my stepdad. So occasionally I call him my father because he's the man that ended up raising me, and my dad is my blood father. So I'll try to be clear when I talk about who I talk about when I'm discussing that. And I loved growing up in Saratoga, but I was a very wild teenager. I became sexually active at the age of 12. I was in a bar at 13, and I met my first husband, who I married at 20, I was 13 and he was 28. And we both lied. I said I was 18. He said he was 23. And I ended up dating him for years. And I'm like, gosh, why would my mother allow that? My 20-year-old son, I'd go nuts, let alone my 20-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that even happened. But I ended up having a beautiful daughter with him. It was an abusive relationship that I stayed in for just over 10 years. And my daughter is absolutely amazing. And then I got out of that relationship and I met another gentleman who was 10 years younger than me. I'm like, well, that didn't work out. Maybe if I go the other way. So I met my son's father, who I never married. We were engaged for 8 years. That was also an abusive relationship. And I was with him. And then when I got out of that relationship, I had just hit rock bottom at that point. I was doing drugs. I was drinking. I don't know how I raised my children and no one died. It's amazing to me. And people would look at my life and I thought everybody did what I did. We partied hard and went out, and part of my job even was entertaining our clients. So I can just see how the whole dysfunction from my birth until my adulthood took place.
Right.
There's probably 50 million stories in there. So I'll let you ask me a couple of questions.
Yeah, I was thinking of like 10 other stories in there just in what
There
you're
are
speaking.
a lot.
So I'm just curious, because you grew up with your father initially and he was abusive. You said he sexually abused you, physically abused you even until you were 9 years old. So after the abuse stopped, I guess, were you still being raised by him or were you taken out of that situation?
No, I wasn't ever taken away from him. I never discussed it. I never talked about it with anyone. I loved my father and I still do. And I may cry. So I'm a crier. Just so you
Feel
know.
free. Please cry if you need to.
In hindsight, from where I am at now, I can see the cycle of abuse, not just for me, but for my father and for my mother from their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I am positive that going back another generation that it existed. I truly believe that our cycles of dysfunction in the family are repetitive. I'm a Christian now. And so part of what I call it when I talk with people is it's generational sin. And it's just a sin that is passed down from family members to family members to family members. And we have to speak out about what happens in order to break that cycle. And I am so, I had a hard time saying I was proud of myself for a long time because I felt as a young Christian in my mid 40s, I was a child in what it meant to be a Christian, and I'm not now. And I'm very proud of myself for what I've done. I'm even more proud of my children for the choices that they make and the way that we discuss all of the things that have happened within our family. Very careful about where I share it, or even this interview, I may or may not share it with my sisters because it still causes them pain, and they're not at the point that I'm at. It's a difficult thing to break that cycle when you go through it. And my dad was raised and it's all family gossip, by a very abusive father. And I never knew him. I knew my grandmother, but only until I was 5 and we moved. And my grandmother was a very sweet woman. And I see that repeat itself. My mom was a very sweet woman, and I saw my father abusing her. I was a very sweet woman, and I was abused by my husband and my son's father, and even into my job, which I did not realize because I was both the victim and the victimizer. It's what I went to prison for, was for my job. And I can just see history repeating itself. But I think as a child, a lot of times that's our parent, and we don't tell when we know our parents do something wrong.
Right.
I was afraid that if I said anything, it would cause more fighting amongst my family, which already fought too much. My father, at the age of 8, had begun building a new family. He married a woman who already had children that he knew previously, and moved them to New York from Chicago. And I was afraid that if I told, he would stop loving me and I would lose my father. And I loved him. I didn't want to lose him. So I never talked about it until I went to prison. And that was one of the best gifts prison gave me. And there were a lot of gifts I got in prison. I needed to go, and I really would not change it for anything. I found healing from the women that were in there. I found many of them had the same types of issues that I had. And it was the first time that I was free to actually discuss what had happened to me as a child and start to understand why I behaved the way that I did. It was the best therapy, and I didn't need to pay for it.
Yeah. I mean, you actually should write a book, Michelle, about your experience. I don't know if you have one in the works, but there's definitely a story there that can help a lot of people, which I know you're already helping a lot of people. So just in talking more about your story, your backstory that led you to, your prison sentence. So all you knew was dysfunction, and you just went from one traumatic relationship to another traumatic relationship. And
Yes.
even when you got your job, I guess that was a dysfunctional relationship too, between you and your boss, right? So it's just like dysfunction after dysfunction. So what led up to you in this job? Like, tell us about the job. Like, you're an adult now. How old are you at this point when you got into this work relationship with your boss?
I started working for Larry when I was 19 years old. And I might have been 20. I think I was 20. Sorry. When you get old and you've served time, you lose track of time.
Yeah.
I lost almost 2 years in prison. So
yeah.
it's still like 12 in my mind.
Yeah.
But I was 20 when I started working there, and I had a newborn child and my daughter, and it was great. I was hired as a bookkeeper for a very small tire company, and I started doing the books, and I thought I was a hot shot. Like he offered me, my gosh, I think minimum wage was like $6.50 an hour, and he offered me $7 an hour, and I negotiated for $7.25. So I got that job, and we had one main building and one garage. So it was one location at that time. But over the course of 15 years of working for him, I started helping him grow that business. And my identity really became who I was in that job, as well as being the mom of my daughter. I'm in an abusive relationship, and my boss would always help me when I had a problem. I'm trying to be safe, and he'd say, do what you need to do, take time off, and he would care for me in that way. I grew up there, and I would also hear things like, you'll never get another job with someone because I didn't have a college degree. You'll never be able to work for someone else making the money that you make for me somewhere else. You don't have a college degree. So I need you to work this Saturday. I gave you that time off you needed a few weeks ago. So it would be really, it was a really manipulative environment. And I can see in hindsight how I was groomed as a young woman to help him in his business ventures, which were not all ethical. And at the same time, as I got older and got into my second abusive relationship, my mind just started to change, where I would take advances from the company. So I'm helping him, and I might as well just say it the way it is. I helped him cook his books. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I was taking advances. I was stealing money from the business.
Right.
Now I kept track of all of it, because in my mind, I was borrowing advances from my job. So part of my pay was on the books. Part was under the table, and I just figured, okay, I will take an advance and I'll end up paying it back. But I didn't have, the tax investigator actually said this to me. Did you have permission? And I said, no. And he goes, well, then you stole. And the light bulb went off, like, wow, I did.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
How you can like convince yourself, I'm just going to borrow it and I'll give it back. I had that much comfortability. And another thing that the judge said to me is that I felt like I had a sense of entitlement to what belonged to Larry, because I helped him grow his business to what it was. And it was a multi-million-dollar corporation in multiple states, still is, with several locations. And I did feel like I had a sense of entitlement to, well, I can borrow this money because I helped him grow it.
Right.
So it was not a good place for me to be.
Oh, no. So how long into the working relationship were you before you started, quote unquote, cooking the books?
Everything started around 2006. So I was 41 when things started happening, 41. And some laws had changed here in New York that had to do with waste tire tax. And I helped hide a few things with which my boss had asked me to help hide, because it would cost so much money to do things the way the new law required us to do. So he was the first time he had taken me out of the office to discuss something he wanted me to do. And I knew it was off, but I also had such a sense of indebtedness to him because he had just given me a $50,000 loan to buy a house. That was a lie. I bought that house and he signed the paperwork. You need this house. You want that house? You can have this house. I will help you. And he signed the paperwork that he gave me a gift of $50,000 and that he was my fiance. And it helped. He was married and he was my boss. And he's one of the very few men that I didn't have an intimate relationship with. I was, again, very promiscuous when I wasn't in a relationship with somebody. But at that point, he helped me get the house, and I owed him because he helped me get this big, beautiful house, which I really couldn't afford.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So you were with him for 20 years at that point before you started?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I helped him. And then in the meantime, what had happened in my personal relationship with my son's father, my best friend had moved into our house, my old house. And then she stayed with us for a few months until she got her own place because she had gone through a divorce. She was watching my son. She was living with us. I even let her use one of my I had an extra vehicle, and she did childcare, and it was great. I would come home, she'd have dinner cooked. It was fantastic. And as my best friend, we got along so well. And I bought the new house. She moved out. I bought the new house. Will and I, my boyfriend, fiance at the time, son's dad, moved to the new home, which Larry helped me get. And I found out that she was pregnant, and no one would tell me who. Well, I found out it was my son's father.
Oh my goodness.
So they had this affair, and she had just stopped talking to me for several months, and now I know why. And I had been blaming myself. What did I do? Why aren't you talking to me? I want to help you with the baby. And then I found out that it was my son's dad. And at the same time, probably a couple of weeks before I found out, I had found drugs in our home. And I called the police because my son's dad threatened me that I would be lucky if I flushed them down the toilet. And he said I would be lucky if he didn't kill me, let alone the people he owed the money to. So I did call the police, and I got a restraining order against him. And he was now moved out of this house that my boss had helped me buy that I couldn't afford. Now I've lost that other income.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of doing what a sane person would have done, which is put the house on the market and move into an apartment, I started borrowing money from the business to help pay my National Grid bill. Just this cesspool of stuff started happening. A tree fell on our well, and E. coli got into the well. My daughter got sick. I had to fix the well. I wrote a check for $7,000 to fix the well. I'll pay it back. So I started stealing in addition to what I was helping my boss do. And at that point in my life, I started drinking heavily. I would drink in my car on my way to work. I would drink during lunch. I would drink in the car on the way home. I would drink and drive with my son in the car. My daughter is now in her own apartment. She was 20 years old, and my son was 8. And I thought I was a great mom because I'm keeping this house to give him stability. Here I am, I'm turning into my own parents. And it hit me, wow, I'm turning into my mother and father. I'm actually abusing my children, but in a different way. The very thing that, I would never hit my kids, but I'll drive drunk with them in the car.
Yeah.
And I said, I need help. And so I went to a church. And at the same time, my boss had gotten caught by the Department of Taxation and Finance in New York State, who ended up doing an audit, and everything just kind of exploded all at one time. And I knew something was going to happen. And I just spilled my guts to this lady at this church. And she said, you know, there's a saying that the truth shall set you free. You just need to stop lying and start telling the truth and pay the consequences. And she said, and trust God that he's going to handle everything for you and it will be okay. And I'll be here for you. And I just couldn't handle it anymore. I had lied to one person to please another person. Then I'd lie to that person to please another person. And I was terrified of my boss and what he would do if he found out I was stealing. But at the same time, I'm stealing from him because I don't want to let my son down and lose our house, because that was the only stability we had. My mind was in such a bad place. And by the time I ended up leaving the employment, it was actually found by one of the girls that worked for me that I was stealing before he got audited. And I stayed. He let me stay. He said, you can pay me back. But that was before he realized that I had stopped helping him and cooking the books for him. And I had stopped filing our tax returns because I was struggling with what I was doing. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong. I knew we were going to get caught. But yet here I am, I'm stealing money. And I was just really confused. I don't know how I got through that time. I don't know how my kids survived that time. Other than by divine intervention and it being God had a plan for all that mess for us. And that's come to realization now 10 years later.
Right. So when you stopped doing the illegal activity, how long did it take before the authorities realized what was happening and you were questioned for whatever was happening?
All in all total, from the time the employee that worked for me told Larry and the time I went to prison, it was about 1.5 years. He got audited. I had written him a letter stating how much I took and what I owed him. I was paying him back. And then he got audited. And so all the money I was paid under the table, he said I stole. It was a nightmare, try to prove after 20 years of working for somebody, the comfortability and the lack of, he had a lack of accountability. Every year we would have an accounting review, but he never paid someone to audit his books. Well, he didn't want his books audited. And by the time they audited it, he just pointed the finger at me and said, look, here's a letter. She admitted she stole this. She must have stole that too. So I saw how I was made a scapegoat. And I just started telling the truth. The tax investigators were involved. I went to court. I admitted to what I did. I was, obviously, I was guilty of several other crimes that I didn't get charged with because he denied everything. So I couldn't get held responsible for something he wasn't committed for helping him. It was his business. But I admitted to the tax investigator that I stole the money. When he asked me that question, did you have permission? No, I didn't have permission. And so I did. I stole. And he sent me to prison.
What was your sentence, Michelle?
My sentence was 2 1/3 to 7 years in New York State. The district attorney and my lawyer had initially been discussing, because I had gotten another job. They knew my charges. I admitted. I couldn't believe they hired me in their accounting department.
Wow.
I admitted that I had committed a crime and they hired me in the accounting department. And, I was in line to replace my boss, who was the controller, when he retired in another year. So the DA had talked with my lawyer about me doing 6 months in a county jail and having 5 years probation. But I was so angry when I went and I had never been angry before. I always kind of just kept my mouth shut and did whatever I was told for whoever I was with. But I went into court and I said, I can't admit I did this because I didn't steal that. I only stole this.
Yeah.
And I was angry. Like this, I'm telling the truth finally, and nobody's believing me. And my lawyer said, sign this paper. I signed the paper. I turned around. The judge said to me, no. I told you to read it. You didn't read it that quick. It was like 6 pages. So I turned around and I started to, he ripped it up, handed me another one. And I turned around and I started to read it. And my lawyer must have had another appointment. He's like, just sign it. It means this, and this. You're not going to go to prison for tax fraud and tax evasion for 7 years. You're going to go for 2 years for grand larceny. And so I signed it again, which I should not have done. And I turned around and the judge said, again, I told you to read this. There's no way you read this so quickly. And I swore. I said, my effing lawyer told me to. And he ripped it up and he said, I'm not going to give you this agreement with 6 months, 5 years probation. Instead, you're getting 2 years for grand larceny.
Why did the judge change it? Because you didn't read the letter out loud?
It was because that's the defining moment of my attitude. I was really angry, and I was, at this time, now I'm blaming Larry for everything. He paid me under the table. He did this with the taxes, and I wasn't accepting responsibility other than saying, yes, I stole because I'm taking a plea. He didn't see any true remorse coming from me. And when I swore in his court at my lawyer,
Oh,
he did not appreciate that.
yeah.
And he just said, this is it. I'm not going to let you get the 6 months. You're going to get 2 years. And so that's what he sentenced me to, 2 years, which would have been 24 months. And the way that they work it is, if you're not well behaved, that's the beginning, that's the shortest time, and the term goes up to 7 years. So
But you actually spent 18 months, right?
I spent 20
months.
So when I got into prison, I was the best prisoner you've ever asked for. So I actually remember being called down to the sergeant's office one time, and there were probably 12 of us, 12 women had gotten called down. And I remember, I love this story. I remember walking into the sergeant's office, and there were about 12 women that had been called down there. We didn't know why. And they're lined up, there's benches that you sit at. So they're lined up, and I walk in and I go, wow, hi, everybody. I was always that happy, hey, here comes that happy girl. How can you be happy in prison? Well, it was because I was saved. I was getting out. I was so relieved to be free.
Yeah.
All this crap from my life. And I just said, how's everybody doing? And one girl looks at me and she goes, Payette, stop being so happy. You're not worried because you don't do anything wrong. I'm in prison.
You don't do anything wrong. That was her perspective.
Yeah.
Of you.
God really turned my life around, and they were right. And we were down there being questioned about some things that were going wrong in the prison within the administration, some things that had happened with a few officers. And, that is the part that breaks my heart for these families, criminals like me, like I was. We are a criminal because of things that we did and choices that we made, but it's not representative of who we are as a human being or what our soul represents.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible talks about us. God's word tells us that we're a great treasure in a fragile clay jar, and our bodies are fragile, our mind is fragile. And I now have a light in my heart that it just can't be extinguished. That light is there forever. And I want to give that light to everybody else.
That's so powerful. That is so powerful. Can we just take it a step back?
Sure.
When you first went to prison, how old was your son?
My son was 10. I went in on August 31st, 2010, and my son was 10 years old. My daughter was 20. In August, she was 21. So it was really difficult for him. We were in this house I couldn't afford. And the whole reason I didn't move was I had just had his father leave. And he loved his dad, regardless of the dysfunction in the home. And I felt I needed to provide him with stability. I stole the money to keep us there. And the very thing that I tried to protect him from and give him, I ended up ripping the rug out from underneath him. We ended up losing that house. Obviously, I got arrested. I did put it on the market in June, but I was taken away on August 31st, 2010. And he ended up having to go live with his paternal grandmother because at the time there was a restraining order. He couldn't live with his dad. And it was a different world. And this is part of my testimony too. You know, I came from a wealthy white upper middle class family. I had never had any exposure to what it meant to be poor or not have enough. And I was struggling with that. So I stole to not have to worry about it. I mean,
To
I
keep
don't
up
know
appearances,
I
basically.
don't know what I was thinking. But my son ended up having to go live with his paternal grandmother, who was on welfare in a city, not in the suburbs where I was. You know, we had a 4-bedroom house with 3 cars, an in-ground pool, a snowmobile, a 4-wheeler. I drove a fancy car. And he went where you had to do the bus line and, you know, food stamps. And it was a different world for him. The very thing I was trying to protect him from, he ended up experiencing, and it was probably the best thing for him in all reality.
Yeah. Did she care for him the entire time that you were in prison?
She did.
Which is a blessing that he wasn't with his abusive father, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Well, there were a few instances where his dad came into the picture. His father never abused him. There was a situation where his dad, my daughter, who was in college and starting her own life, that was a struggle of a relationship because here she is feeling responsible for this young boy and in college, and her mother's in prison and everything she was so proud of, this big house, and my mother is the controller of this company. All of a sudden, I'm a fraud. And she gets a phone call from Billy, my son, that his dad is there, he's drunk and he's beating up his grandmother, and Billy was scared. So my daughter ended up having to go and get my son. So she did care for him. A lot of times she would have him for the weekend and things when she didn't have school or work that she had to worry about. You know, generational sin, family dysfunction, repetitive things that happen within our families, once you talk about them, and again, in the Bible, it talks about this too, you know, you put your light up on a hill, not in a bowl. Mold festers and grows in the dark, damp places where it's grimy, but when you shine a light on it, it dies. It's the same thing with dysfunction. Talking with my kids about drug use, alcoholism, abusive relationships, and then forgiveness. which is the biggest gift. You have to be able to forgive people, and just, it's more for yourself in the beginning. And then it's just so freeing to be able to forgive people, because it gives them the opportunity to grow themselves as well. I went
Yes.
up a rabbit trail
Oh,
again
no, it's
on.
okay. Everything you're saying is so powerful, especially wrapping it up with the forgiveness piece. So when you were in prison, what was the hardest part about leaving your kids, in particular your son who was only 10 years old? Like while you were inside, like what was the hardest things for you as a mother?
I remember within the first, well, I was in county jail for a week while I was awaiting them to transport me to the state prison. And that's how it works here. And then you go through your registration. I was in what we call reception, and my paperwork got lost. So I was in reception for probably about 6 weeks, when normally it's a 2-week period. I thought, this is hell. this is what hell is like. It was really difficult, but the most difficult thing was the guilt. Still struggle with that a little bit. The guilt of not being able to protect my son, and not being able to provide a safe home for him. And one day, probably about 4 weeks into it, there was this woman called Davida, and she was Muslim. And she came to me and she says, because at this point, someone had given me a Bible and I'm reading it, and I'm remembering the thing that this lady at the church told me about the truth shall set you free. And I'm reading a Bible, still not saved, but I'm reading this Bible. And she goes, you say you're a Christian. And she goes, but did you ever stop to think that maybe God put you here so that you would love him as much as you love your son? And I couldn't even imagine loving anybody more than I loved my son. And that was the beginning of, we had a great friendship. After the next couple of weeks, she was one of the most impactful people on my walk in Christianity, which is so surprising from a Muslim woman that she didn't try to convert me to Islam. She really led me to understanding that God wants to be number one in our life. He needs to be number one in our life for everything to have that trickle down effect of care and grace and love and forgiveness. Everything that is good comes from him. And everything that I had in my life was total dysfunction and pain, including my crying every day over the guilt that I was having. And she said, you need to let that go. That's dishonoring to the God that you claim you believe in. And so we really grew as friends during that time. And it was probably one of the most powerful friendships I've ever had. And I knew the woman for 2 weeks. Sorry.
No, it's so powerful. What she's saying is just so right on, because you never know who God is going to use in your life to get you on the track that he needs you to get onto.
Right, exactly. And it happened again. I got transferred to a place called Beacon Correctional Facility.
Beacon. Okay, now I'm seeing something here.
Yeah, you are. So I'm at Beacon Correctional Facility, which was just such a breath of fresh air. It was a work camp. We did chores from morning to night, literally from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. we were working. We did get some breaks, but you had your chores at your dorm that you were living in. You had your chores that you did for the facility that we were in. And then part of our sentence was community service. So local businesses and organizations would hire and put bids in with the state for inmates to come out into the community and work in their facilities, I did so many different things. My skills grew. It was, again, I can see God working in my life because I learned how to clean instead of having a maid. I learned how to paint a building. I painted a firehouse instead of paying somebody to come do it. Now I have this skill, which, since you can see on video, I have this beautiful bright green living room. My son and I painted together in my home, that now I own a home that I can afford. And so I got all these skills, and my job at the facility was cleaning the chapel. And if that doesn't have God written all over it, I don't know what it does. But we had a Muslim chaplain. We had a Catholic deacon who came in once a week and then on Sunday to do a Catholic service. And I was listed as a Protestant because the church that I went to was a non-denominational church. It is, I still go to the same place. Non-denominational, and we did not have any Protestant chaplains because the woman who was there passed away. So they took everything that was in this closet that was her office and shoved it into a little corner of the room. They were using it for storage. And then we had the Muslim chaplain, and her name was Sister, I can tell her name, Sister Melody Rashada, who, again, was one of the most impactful people in my life. I would go in, I would clean, we would talk, we became friends. And one day I said to her, I'm cleaning, can I organize this storage room on Tuesday nights when Deacon Frank is here? Because it was my night off, and I didn't want to go to the yard. There was always fights, there were always trouble. I just didn't want to be around the drama. And so I'm like, I could put a Christian library together. There were some interesting books in there. And she said yes. So I started making friends with the Catholic deacon, and we would talk, and I organized that closet. I don't know how to catalog a library, but I put everything in alphabetical order. And I started talking about some of the books that I was reading with some of the women that went to church, and I started going to church occasionally in prison. Again, I tried to avoid it because there's some dysfunction there. A lot of the girls would use it as a way to hang out with their girlfriends, and that bothered me. And I really just wanted to disappear into my own little world. And I started reading, and I got moved to a bunk in a dorm that was in the top corner of the room. So I had walls on both sides. So it was very safe. No one could come up behind me. I was on the top bunk, so it was harder to reach. I felt very safe up there. And I had a window, and out the window you could see Mount Beacon, which is what the facility was named. And we could open our windows maybe a half of an inch for air, and I could listen to the baseball game. There was a high school field across the camp, and you could hear the aluminum bats hitting the baseball. And I would just dream of watching my son who played baseball, playing baseball, and read these books. And I developed a relationship with Christ while I was there, and that's where I was saved. So it really was a beacon of light moment in my life. I started this Christian library. I came to Christ while I was sitting there reading these books. And then that summer, I was asked by Melody, Sister Melody, the Muslim chaplain, if I wanted to do this thing Prison Fellowship has called Angel Tree. And Angel Tree is a program that provides a Christmas gift to a child from their incarcerated parent. And it is actually a gift that people from churches on the outside will purchase and deliver to the child. But it's from the incarcerated parent with a message from that mom or dad. And Melody said, do you want to do this? I can't do it because I'm Muslim. but you could do it and I'll let you do it. Catholic Deacon Frank over here said he'll mail it in and do it under him if you help the women fill out the applications. So we used that Christian library, which is really, I'm saying a library. It was probably an 8x10 room. And I would sit there with the women one by one, helping them. A lot of them couldn't read or write. And I would, here I am with this education and I'm able to read and write. And I helped them fill out the applications. And then we would look at these books together and people started borrowing the books and reading. And we just saw God really on fire at the prison from that moment forward. And I got my son a gift, and that's how he met the people from the church.
And this started your ministry. This started Beacon of Light. Your is it a nonprofit that you started?
It is. Yep. We're a 501c3 nonprofit in the state of New York. We actually work, and God has just woven everything together so beautifully. I wrote a letter. Chuck Colson, who was Richard Nixon's legal counsel, founded Prison Fellowship after he went to prison for Watergate related crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the one who started Angel Tree with a woman named Mary Kay Beard, who was a former inmate. And I totally agree with what she saw. As a mom, we would risk getting a ticket, which a ticket is you break a prison rule and it can affect your good time. But I would risk getting a ticket by sneaking a hard candy into my mail, try to mail a peppermint home to my son, or taking a sticker from a visitation room and you hide it in your bra so that you can mail a sticker home to your child. Wrapping up like a little bar of soap, those little soaps that you get at the hotels. Some of the women would have these little soaps. And I wrapped one up one time and tried to mail it home. And my daughter was just devastated because I would mail things to her, not to her grandmother, to his grandma. And she got the letter ripped in half and taped back together, but there was no soap and she only got half of the card that I had made for them. So we risked these tickets to try to give things to our kids. And here's this beautiful opportunity called the Angel Tree, where I can actually provide a real gift that's $20 in value, and someone from the church will go out, buy it, and deliver it with the message that I handwrite to my child, and they deliver that gift to my child on my behalf. It's really amazing. I wrote the letter. I didn't get a letter back from Chuck Colson. I wish I did. I actually never met him. He passed away on April 21st, 2012. And I came home on April 27th, 2012. So he died 6 days before I was released. And, but I did get a letter from a beautiful woman named Myra, who I stayed in touch with, and I volunteered for them when I came home. No one would hire me. So I volunteered, and I started that as a ministry at my church. I took that over. And after meeting a few families, I realized Beacon of Light came to be because we would deliver these gifts at Christmas, and then the church had no contact the rest of the year. It was a Christmas program. It was our, I should probably be careful saying this, but it was our way of doing something at Christmas and feeling good about helping. But then we forgot about these families afterwards. And I saw the need of the families needing help with transportation to the prisons to visit their incarcerated parents. I saw the needs of these moms who didn't have support that's healthy. How can we meet on a regular basis and talk? Do you need food? Do you need clothing? Do you want to join a Bible study? And that's how Beacon of Light started. And it all came from prison. And now we serve over 200 families in 10 counties locally. and our studies cover several states. So it's neat. Now with Zoom, of course, God used COVID to make us be able to connect across the country, which is awesome.
How many families do you think you've reached since you started your organization? Do you have any idea?
In a total for separate, probably over 500.
That is amazing.
We do try to stay in touch with them on an ongoing basis. So some people will stay in touch, some won't. I have people that we've worked with they're our family now. I mean, we are enmeshed in life. We're doing life together.
Yeah.
Another prison joke.
Yeah. Oh, right. I just got it. So I feel like we can talk for another hour because you have so much more in you that I would love to. Maybe we need to have coffee or something and talk more on the side. But yeah, just winding down the conversation, because I think your testimony is so powerful, just how everything that you've gone through, God used it for his glory. And now you're helping other people.
Yes.
You've stopped the generational curse in your own family. So there's so much good that you're doing. Now, where can people find you if they want to know more about you, or maybe they want to volunteer or help support? Where can people find you?
We're on the web. You can go to our website at www.beaconoflight.org. And it's beaconoflight.org. They can call. I don't have an 800 number, but I have a 518 number. So it's 518-982-0179. Or they can email us at info@beaconoflight.org.
Thanks for listening to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. If you liked what you heard today, please be so kind and rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, because when you do that, you get this podcast in front of more listeners. And I want to offer more encouragement to a wider audience. So any positive reviews that you can give would be so helpful. Until next time.